Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Happy New Year! We've started off 2021, and I hope you are ready to make it the year of you. What I mean by that is you decide each day the choices you make, so you determine your direction. Why do we use GPS or Google Maps? So we know we're headed in the right direction. Let's take control of our life this year and decide to design our life and not live by default. I can't thank you enough. We keep growing our podcast, and we're now in over 68 countries and all 50 states in the United States. Thank you for making the Charge Podcast, and thank you for sharing the podcast with others. We are starting off January of 2021 with some great guests on the Charge Podcast. Our guests this month share their expertise on how to handle stress and anxiety, looking to turn your business over by learning the systems of a successful succession plan, or living in your center to design your life with purpose. Or how about, do you need to create some strategies for financial planning to live a happier life? If you are feeling frustrated and stressed out with your professional or personal life, I know in each of these podcasts, the strategies that each guest shares can propel you to live a charged life in 2021. Chargers are committed to finding how each day they can make their life better by the willingness to learn, grow, and become the person they were meant to be. I think this quote I coined in my new book, Cultivate Positive Culture. Living your life by design allows you not to live it by default. You made a great choice in listening to this podcast. Remember, the podcast is named Charge after my mantra, create habits around real goals every day. Let's get recharged in this podcast to influence a positive culture so you can take simple positive actions each day. Are you ready? Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back this week again for another great guest. I love sharing these different viewpoints with you because it gives you a chance now that we're in early 2021. What do you really want to do? What changes do you want to meet? We are the Charge Podcast, so create habits around real goals every day. I'm hoping you have those goals set, but now it's about putting them in action and what will you move forward with. And we've all had challenges throughout last year, but the thing is, we've got to really quit looking back and look forward. And that's what we're going to do today with my guest, Ann Rulo, who is an author, speaker, and a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. She is the author of 2 Bible studies, Cultivating Joy and The God Blanket. Ann lives in Northwest Missouri with her 2 children and her husband, Tim, who is a teacher and a head football coach. And a good friend of mine. Ann, it is so great to have you on the Charge Podcast.
I am so thrilled to be here. It really was such an honor when you guys reached out to be together today.
Well, we have some history with each other, with you and your time when you were in Jefferson City, and you and your husband, Tim, are 2 special people that I think a lot of and do great things with young people, but you do a lot in other areas too that we're going to explore today with our conversation. But before I go there, Ann, we all have these habits that we do. And you know my mantra, create habits around real goals every day. What habit or habits do you think has led to success in your life?
You know, it's really interesting. So I'm sure that there are some people who listen to you who are Enneagram people,
Yes.
have figured out what number they are. And for those who are familiar with that, I am an Enneagram 9 wing 1, which basically means I'm a hippie with a perfectionist streak. And so that combined with being a Christian, when you had asked me to kind of think about what my motto is, it really is, I think I'm someone who keeps my nose to the grindstone. I get my reps in and I work really hard, but I leave the results up to whatever God would bring, right? Kind of my nose to the grindstone, but my hands open. and just trust that he's going to do with my work what he intends to. And so I would say like that I do. I show up and I do my work and I get my reps in, but that I'm really open to whatever ultimately comes of that, because my job is just to serve people.
Yeah. Well, what a great philosophy to have. And I know that's so true about you, because with our time together, you were so open and willing to be able to share with others. And it's kind of interesting because the path you've taken, and I'll
Yeah.
kind of let you share that story because, you're a counselor, you're a, family therapist, those type of things. So how did that story kind of start, and why did, maybe let's go back even some in your days that you were deciding what you were going to do? How did you decide that career path?
Yeah, I'm a wanderer. It's a really good thing that my mom is not a very rigid person, because I changed majors 7 times in college.
Okay. Yeah.
And so every time I'd call, she's like, "Now what are you doing?" And so every step though that I took, it was under the heading of human services, whether that was athletic training, whether that was in education, where I ultimately landed kind of in this family services kind of area. And so I graduated with a master's degree in family studies. And what I ended up finding out was that those people usually stay on as academics and do research. And I thought, I don't want to do that. And then I got my first job serving in Division of Youth Services. So those are young people who get in trouble. And I served as a family therapist with them. And I thought, I need an actual license in counseling. And so went to my husband and I said, that first master's degree, I'm going to need another. Sorry about that. So I have 2, not because I'm cool, but because I didn't know what I was doing. And so then I got a license in professional counseling and marriage and family therapy, as you've mentioned. And I did that for a long time, almost 15 years. I did frontline counseling. I was at Westminster College there in Fulton, serving those students. And then I also did that work with Division of Services with those young people and their families. And I got to a point where I said, I would get through a therapy session with someone and I'd think, that was a great conversation, and only 2 of us heard it. Or like, that was a great thing we just landed on, and there were only 2 of us in the room. And I think my path is very similar to other people's path. You do your profession for a while and then you want to give back. You learn enough about it that you say, I want to share with more people because my impact is going to be wider. I can serve more people in that way. And so actually, when we left Jeff City, my husband said, "You are an incredible writer and speaker, and let's make the changes. Let's reduce our bills. Let's get the small house. Let's, do the things that we have to so that you can pursue this dream." And that's what ended up happening. And that's when I wrote my first book. And now I've written another. And that's how I've landed in this space.
Well, that's a great story in so many different ways we can go. But I think the way I'll go is, since we're early in 2021 yet, we're still all dealing with COVID
Yes.
And the impacts that it's had. What have you been sharing with people? Because it has been a heavy burden, and you've seen it, I'm sure. And we all know it's been a burden, but some of us are really resilient, and we're working through that and realizing that this is a long-term game. Because let's be honest, even myself, I thought a few months and then we were going to move forward. And I'm a very positive person, but I've realized it's got to be the long-term game. But for some people, it's really wearing on them. What would you say to someone that's having those challenges? We're going to use your expertise right out the gate if you're okay. But I know you talk about this because I've seen several of your videos, and I think it would be really important for people to realize, because with it being early in 2021, we've got to make a choice to make that change. And that's what I want out of my Chargers.
Yep. So as we head out of 2020 and into 2021, what I really hope is that people they're being really authentic with whatever it is that they are encountering. I think there is a resistance to facing our pain. Sometimes we think of it as weakness, or we think, if I'm having a tough day or I'm being sad, or I read a news article that makes me feel empathy or sadness for people, that I've just got to shove that away, that I'm only going to be positive. Or sometimes in the church, we talk about spiritually bypassing. I'm only going to think about my blessings. Well, the reality is that everyone has all the emotions. And so I just ask people to lean into whatever it is, because if you're having difficulties and you don't deal with it and you bury it, it shows up like weeds. They just pop up. And so people think that the best way is just to white knuckle it and push through those difficult emotions. Actually, the fastest way to heal and get back to a space where you're being productive and positive and charging forward, like you talk about, is by actually addressing those things and thinking about the things and making sense of them, making meaning of the difficult things so that you can move forward with positivity.
Oh, what a great philosophy. And I think that's the thing. Realize what are you facing, realize it, and then you're able to move forward versus sometimes, like you said, too many of us, we bury it and we think it's not going to go away. It's not. If you've got those challenges, it's there. So hopefully you'll take that. And for Chargers, that's kind of a added bonus today, right out the gate, because I thought that was just on my mind. I needed to ask that. So what have you found? You kind of talked about why you made that career change and you all made some sacrifices to be able to do that. But what have you found that's most satisfying about really stepping into this new calling that you're doing, Ann?
Yeah, I think the most succinct way I can say it is I finally feel like I'm living in the center of my design. I think that everybody has a purpose, a design that God has created them. There's a way that they are supposed to serve people. Now, for some people, that's going to be more public. For other people, that's going to be very behind the scenes. We know that there seems to be, the world gives value to one more than the other, but I don't think that's true generally. And there are people, I think, that sometimes for the sake of money or prestige or what your family expects of you or whatever, you try to shove yourself, this square peg in a round hole. And while I don't think I was necessarily doing that, I just hadn't pivoted quite enough or learned quite enough about myself yet. And now I finally feel like there's a flow there, that book Flow. You maybe have heard of it. Yes, I can never say the guy's last name because it's like 14 letters.
Yes, I know.
Great book. And I'm finally doing the thing that at the end of it, it is literally almost like an adrenaline high when you're doing the thing you're designed to do. And I'm just so grateful to, one, be able to do it, and two, have a partner who has just said, you've got to go for it. And not because it's like bringing us tons of money, right? Yeah. Like he just said, I know this is what you're created for, go for it.
Yeah, and that becomes really passionate. I think it's good because some of our listeners and some of our previous guests here, as we're going in 2021, they're really trying to figure that out. Some people are really trying to figure out what is that for them, because yes, we all need a paycheck. We have to be able to pay our bills, but we want to really find that purpose of what we're designed for. I wrote a quote in my last book, Cultivate Positive Culture, and I said, finding your purpose is God's gift to you.
Yes.
Sharing your purpose is your gift to God.
That's so good.
And I think it is so true. And, and realize when we're talking purpose, we're not talking about some high level thing.
Not
purpose could be that you are being that strong spouse for your significant other, and you're sharing it with other people that are struggling doing those same things. So I don't want you to think that when we're talking purpose, we're talking about this some big thing, because I think that's what people get out of it. It may be right where you're at. Mm-hmm. But what changes is your purpose of how you serve those people that are your coworkers. You become that positive light. You bring your faith into your workplace instead of hiding it and not allowing it out, that you share it openly. And I think that becomes the key. And in this podcast, my Chargers know I'm going to talk about faith. If you don't have it and you're listening on the other side, that's okay. I'm okay with that. That's your choice. But it's our podcast, and I kind of created it. If we're going to talk about faith and have those discussions to be able to get there. So I think it's really important then, Ann, I know what you really enjoy doing and talked about several of the books that you've wrote already. What are you most passionate about with sharing with others through that writing and speaking?
I think it is that I want people to fall in love with how they're designed. I think sometimes people will notice that they have giftings in certain areas, but then they'll compare it to something else they think they want, and they'll miss the joy that they can have in whatever it is they're gifted to do. I love the Theodore Roosevelt quote, "Comparison is the thief of all joy," because it is so true. You cannot compare what you're designed to do to what someone else, to what maybe what you're thinking you want to do. So I want them to fall in love with it, and then I want them to be brave enough to use it. You know, there are some things that people are called to do that may be very there's people that are like, wait, you got 2 master's degrees and 2 licenses and you were making a nice salary and you stopped making any money to write, right? It feels sometimes like when people say I'm quitting my life here in Ohio and I'm going to Hollywood, they're like, really? Like, it takes a lot of bravery sometimes to step out into what it is that you're designed to do. And so it is so important for people, for their own satisfaction, like you said, and then for the people that they're designed to serve, that they fall in love with their own design and then be brave enough to do it.
Yeah, because, the greatest servant leader was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have to realize that we're put on earth for a purpose to serve others. What is that? And each one of us has to ask that question. And I think a great time in the year to be able to really dig deep in yourself, to be able to ask those questions, what it is. And, and I've got the Cultivating Joy. You do have a great gift for writing. I do some writing. I've written some books, but I'll be honest, I'm challenged in that area because I write like I talk, as my editor told me. So she's got a lot of editing to do when she does it. But it's about really sharing that message that's there and putting it in your heart and being able to move forward with it. I think the other thing that's so important, I think this is, and we can dig kind of deep in this, but I'll kind of start with your story, is, how your marriage has been blessed with really kind of taking on this new season in life. And then maybe we'll dig a little bit deeper in marriage of how do you find that? So if couples are struggling a little bit, that they can get there. But let's talk about your story a little bit. How has that really blessed your marriage in the path that you decided to say, yes, we're going to do this path versus the traditional path?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. My husband's job as a head football coach is really public. And he has a lot of pressure in his job and a lot of pressure to perform and be successful. And it is hard to have 2 public people in a job. And for a long time, I wasn't the public person. I was quite literally behind a closed door where I could tell no one what I did because I was a therapist and I was protected by HIPAA, right? I couldn't tell people things. And I think what has been so interesting, and I think this is a mark of healthy marriages, is that when I said, hey, I kind of want to switch this thing up and I'm going to start being out there a little bit more, that was not threatening to him in the least. Like he truly, and I think there's some male-female dynamics there that sometimes happen in marriages that can be difficult. But he's been my greatest champion. And I think a mark of healthy marriages is when you see your partner doing what it is they're designed to do, and you're just in awe of them. And that's true. That's what it's been. It's as though he was even more thrilled for me than I was because he got to see me do even what he had always thought that maybe I would do. And I think that's a fun part of how marriages get blessed when you lean into whatever it is you're designed to do, because you already care about this person. You already love this person, but then you get to see them really become even more fully who they are. And I think your love continues to grow for each other and you get to see one another experience risk. And with our marriage specifically, he has already been a public figure and he's already had to face criticisms that come with being a public figure. And so those days that I want to quit, or those days that I get a comment on an article that is maybe not as flattering, he's the one that coaches me through because he's already been there. And so it's been a neat bonding place for our marriage, because I'll tell him something and he's like, yeah, that's what happens when you step out in leadership, and then I'm comforted that it's kind of like misery loves company sometimes, because he's already been through the fire a little bit.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, you have that supportive arm. I think the question I'm going to try to throw you is the challenges in some marriages, they don't have that supportive arm. So
Right.
how do you kind of deal with that situation? Because if someone has it within themselves that they want to be able to move forward, but don't have that supportive husband or spouse, we'll just use spouse. So it doesn't matter which way it is. How do they move forward to be able to really do what they feel like they're passionate about and still be able to have the marriage?
Right. Well, I guess I'll say that, this is the very I'm actually out doing this, but for 15 years before now, there were little versions of me doing this because of where he was in his career. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I think in our marriage, just because of where we were, I didn't feel resentful about that, but I could see how that would happen. Especially in a lot of marriages where somebody has one spouse has a job that's very public, or a job that's very time consuming, or a job that makes the majority of the money. It can sometimes be hard for the other person to take on another role. And so, a lot of it is conversation, and a lot of it is collaborative. Hey, how can I lean a little bit into this, feel a little bit satisfied as I'm moving forward? Because that's what it looked like. 10 years ago, it was a tiny little family blog and poems that I wrote to my sister, and that was all we could do at the time. And so I think it's just a matter of maybe taking on little bits at a time. And I think one, that brings satisfaction to the spouse who's wanting to move in a different direction. And two, if there's not the support from your partner, if you're doing little bits at a time, lack of support from a partner a lot of times comes out of fear. They worry about how the dynamic is going to change. They worry that their spouse is going to change. It may feel threatening to them in their own position, whatever it happens to be. So if you're taking little bitty steps, sometimes they can say, oh, that wasn't that scary. Oh, that wasn't that scary either. And so maybe you can kind of much more gently move into it with one another.
Yeah. And I think the key is, like you've spoke about, is number one, we got to be open about it. We got to really decide how that is. Then there has to be some open communication.
Yes.
And that becomes a real challenge. It's a challenge in business. The number one challenge, I'm going to speak about it this afternoon with a group, is within a business is communication. No one says that word, but that's the challenge behind it. And I would think, I'm not in the marriage family counseling side of it, but I would think that's a pretty big challenge in marriages and families, that we don't communicate enough what we need. So share that with me. We'll kind of go the marriage family counseling, right? Is a couple that is having a challenge right now. What would be a step or two that you would share with them that they do need to kind of think about to be able to open up, to be able to really, because the challenge we're getting today is everyone thinks the divorce route is the easy route. And instead, it's really about what can we do? And, God calls us to be united in one marriage. What can we do if we're in that place, to be able to try to strengthen that marriage?
Well, as you mentioned, communication, I think part of it is sometimes we're communicating a lot. Like there's a lot of words being thrown around,
Yeah.
but maybe they're not authentic.
Mhm.
What am I saying and how am I saying it? I think a lot of it is driven by fear. So what am I afraid of? It's a really good internal question to be asking yourself regarding conflict in a marriage. Another good question is, what am I not saying? And why am I not saying it? As a therapist, if you're in that dangerous of a spot that it looks like your marriage is going to end or you're terribly unhappy, find a good marriage therapist. A lot of times it's like you can't see the forest for the trees. Going to therapy is not a mark that your marriage is bad. You may just have gotten yourselves into some patterns of communication, or you're bringing in baggage from way before you guys met each other that someone else can be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Why do you react that way? Because it doesn't make sense to the therapist in the room. And then you can be like, oh, it's because I have this insecurity, or this was the dynamic I had with my parent, or this is the fear that I have. Like there's just stuff you can unpack with an outside person that can really help.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I just think it's really important, because I don't know who, but you and I both believe in this. Somebody that's listening to the podcast needed that.
Yeah.
And that's the key, is we never know who we're speaking to. And that becomes the real key, is how can you open up that communication within your family? And don't be afraid of it, because if it makes it stronger, that's the whole key.
Yeah.
We become better. Self-development is about getting better. That's the reason we do these podcasts, is to help you, but you have to decide to take action. So if a therapist would help you, it's worth that time to be able to move forward. And I've truly enjoyed our time. We're not done, because I've got the recharge round that I want to get to, but I'm going to kind of leave it open, because, my audience are chargers. There's people that they're trying to go after things, but they're trying to create habits that really allows them to achieve their goals. What would you just want to share with them that's on your heart? And I'll let you kind of share that, and then we'll jump into the recharge round.
Oh, so glad you asked that question, because, I went on a walk this morning and I was thinking about us recording this, and I felt like maybe I was going to be talking to a whole lot of people that don't operate the same way that I do. Now I'm married to a coach. So I'm married to a person who's like, here's my goals, here's my Excel spreadsheet, here's how this is all going to work out. And I'm like, I'm going to do my work today. It may or may not pan out, right? Like I'm very much more organic about it. And so I would say, in terms of a habit, I love that there are hard chargers. I do. Like those people get stuff done. And I think there's some fields where that's easier than others. I'm in creative arts, like that, and social sciences, right? Yeah. Those don't have quite the hard edges as much as business and science and tech and that sort of thing. But I will say, I think in terms of how I approach things, I am as dedicated to leaving myself open to tenderness and love and self-care as I am to the work. Because if you charge too hard and you ignore your needs and you don't take care of yourself, you will not accomplish as much as you would have otherwise. I think there is, again, that kind of that white knuckle concept. I'm just going to work. I'm just going to outwork everybody. Well, you are human and you have limits. And so as the one hippie therapist that you may have on here, I'm going to say, make sure you are taking care of yourself, allowing yourself to recharge in order to be this charger that you want to be. That would be my number one thing.
What great advice. I can tell you, I was challenged in that early in my career. Luckily went to a spiritual retreat in 2006. And still to today, I credit that retreat for, it didn't change me completely, but it started making that process of me realizing it and being open to it. And that becomes the real key. Are you taking that time for yourself to be able to recharge? So great advice, Anna. Appreciate you sharing that. Let's jump in the recharge round. I have 6 questions. A lot of them are based on my framework, the type of things that I like to visit about. And the first one is all about your mindset. How do you believe that your mindset affects your daily living?
So my mindset is that the emphasis is on effort rather than outcome. So I'm going to lean into my design, do what I believe God has called me to do, serve the people I believe he's called me to serve, and trust him with the results. I really love just leaving it open to however it turns out. As long as I put in my effort, that's what I'm concerned about.
Excellent. What do you do daily to bring energy in your life? You said you was out for a walk this morning, so that may be one.
Yeah. No, I am a deeply connected with nature person. And so spending time with the Lord is one, exercise is another, and usually that happens out in the world. So yes, I was walking through the park and looking at the trees and watching the squirrels and all the things. I feel much better after that.
Great. How about the number one connection or relationship that's made the biggest impact on your life?
All right. So the easy answer is my mom, but I'm going to bypass it because I talk about her often in a lot of other things that I do. And my hard answer, I'm not sure the right word is hard, But the answer I came up with was a woman named Dr. Coleman. She was the director of my first graduate program there at Mizzou. And she was kind of the first woman that said, don't sell yourself short. And she's really blunt. Like, this is not fuzzy. This is not kind. This is, and you'll get, she doesn't operate like me. It's not like she's like, you have a gift. Don't mess it up. Do your job. Like, she was just very bold with me and made me braver, even in the middle of not having much of a filter.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. How about the advice that's influenced your life the most?
Be present.
Mm.
My mother had a poem. Gosh, I've forgotten the name of it now. I'll even maybe send you an email about it later. And it was just basically that you would just be present in every moment of your life and not be rushing to the next thing.
Yeah, so important there. And we can all take advice on that, is how can we be more present, and even today we might be able to be out more. You can still be present with people. How can you connect with them in other ways?
Oh, Gary, it's Slow Me Down, Lord. That's the name of the poem.
Oh, Slow Me Down, Lord. Great. Thank you for sharing that. If you don't mind, share that with me, and I'll put that in our Charge Podcast notes for everyone.
Absolutely.
So you can look at chargepodcast.com and we'll have that in notes for you. I know this one is tough because you're a writer, so I know you like to read books too.
Yes.
But recommend your favorite book and why you love it.
It actually wasn't hard. It is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. She is the most valuable social scientist of the last 20 years. I truly believe that.
Yeah, that is a great book. I've read that book, and that's one I highly recommend for anyone to jump into and take a read. Now, my last question for you, and almost made it through the recharge round. What legacy do you want to leave the world?
That I would help people to be unequivocally in love with the design God gave them and use it for good.
Well, you've definitely helped people today because you've given us a way to basically do some introspection into our own life. And that's what I would tell you, Chargers, that you're going to really have to do is really do some introspection and decide what action do you want to take from that. Maybe it's just being present more. Maybe it's about taking a walk in nature. You decide what that is, but then implement that action to be able to move it forward for yourself. And can you share with them, if they're interested in your books or checking out your information and connecting with you, how they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a website with an active blog and lots of other resources. It's AnnRulo.com, ANNERULO.com. And then I'm on several social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and it's all the same handle, at Ann M. Rulo. And then my books you can find on my website. They are also available on Amazon. The first one, Cultivating Joy, is a 5-week study over the book of Philippians, and the God Blanket is a 5-week study over Colossians.
Super. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing with our Chargers. It's been wonderful catching up with you and having you on the podcast.
Agreed. Thank you so much for having me.
Chargers, I hope you're charged up now, but like Ann told us, don't just charge, also recharge. Recharge for yourself. And I want you to think about that as you go forward this next week. What are you going to do for yourself to recharge yourself up? Let's come back next week and we'll have another great guest for you. Remember, like and share the podcast and let others know about it. That's how we keep growing our audiences. Come back next week and we'll have another great guest. Make it a great day. We have our first sponsor of the Charge Podcast. We welcome Pulse Hit to our show, and we want you to check out their services. Most companies don't have time for a wellness program. Pulse Hit is your mobile turnkey wellness solution to guide your employees to a healthier lifestyle. Support your team in achieving their full potential so you can go back to running your business. Check them out on their website at PulseHit, PulseHiit.com. PulseHit.com. And if you can't check that out, go to our show notes at chargepodcast.com and we'll have you a link to their website. Thanks for joining me. Here we go.
This podcast has ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.